Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The words sliced through the elegant murmur of the restaurant like a cold blade. Forks paused midair. Crystal glasses stilled in hesitant hands. Even the gentle clinking of silverware against fine china seemed to fade into the background. Donald Trump sat motionless, his fingers resting lightly on the menu. He had barely spoken a word since walking in. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you like similar stories, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new videos. His posture was stiff with self-importance, his chin slightly raised, as if the few extra inches would grant him more authority. His name tag read Ethan. This establishment maintains a strict dress code. Sir, Ethan continued, his voice laced with quiet arrogance. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who does not meet our standards. A ripple of amusement spread through the nearby tables. A well-dressed couple exchanged knowing glances, the man smirking over the rim of his wine glass. A group of executives in tailored suits chuckled under their breath. Who let this guy in? The question was practically written on their faces. Trump exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes shifting from the waiter to the crowd. Le Magnifique, his restaurant, was as stunning as ever. The velvet tablecloths, the golden glow of the chandeliers, the intoxicating symphony of wealth and power. This was a place where the elite dined, where the world's most influential figures sealed multimillion-dollar deals over dry-aged steaks and vintage Bordeaux. Yet tonight, its own owner was being treated like an outsider. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Oh, this is going to be interesting. The moment everything changed just 2 hours earlier, Trump had stepped out of his black SUV onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The night air was crisp, laced with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flash of paparazzi cameras in the distance. He hadn't planned to come here tonight. Not at all. He had just left a meeting downtown, dressed in a simple navy blue suit. No tie, no entourage, no announcement of his arrival. Just him. He was in the mood for a good steak, and what better place than his own restaurant? But as he stepped inside, something became very clear. Nobody recognized him. Hadn't even had the chance at the front, barely glanced up from her reservation list, being dismissed like some uninvited polished man with a French young waiter that was no older than 25, gave him an almost imperceptible look of doubt before reluctantly leading him to a quiet corner table. And now, here he was, being told to leave. A lesser man might have been embarrassed, might have stammered an apology and hurried toward the door. But Trump? Trump leaned back in his chair. Tell me, he said, his voice calm, almost amused. What exactly about my attire doesn't meet your standards? Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the casual confidence in the man's tone. Well, sir, he cleared his throat. For one, we require our male guests to wear a tie. And he gestured vaguely toward Trump's head. Your hair is a bit unkempt. Trump nearly laughed. Unkempt? If this kid thought his hair was unkempt, he should have seen Einstein's. But he didn't argue. He simply tilted his head, watching the waiter with a level gaze. You know, Trump said, I own a lot of ties. Probably more than you've ever seen in your life. Ethan's smugness faltered for just a moment. That's great, sir, he said quickly, regaining his composure. But tonight, you're not wearing one. From across the room, a man in a tailored Armani suit let out a quiet chuckle. A woman in a glittering black dress whispered something to her companion, both of them watching intently. This was turning into a spectacle. Ethan, sensing the growing attention, straightened his back. He was enjoying this. Trump, however, was testing him. And tell me, what exactly do you do here? He asked, drumming his fingers lightly against the table. Ethan frowned, unsure if the question was serious. I'm a waiter, he said slowly. A senior waiter. Actually, I've been here for 6 months. Trump nodded as if considering the answer. Then, with a slight smile, he said, not for much longer. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? Trump didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly closed the menu and placed it neatly on the table. Then, in a tone so casual it felt like a quiet storm before the thunder, he said, I own this place. Silence. For a moment, Ethan just stared. Then, he let out a short, disbelieving laugh. I'm sorry. What? You heard me. Trump leaned forward slightly, his voice lower but no less powerful. I own Le Magnifique. This is my restaurant. My chefs. My staff. My rules. And you? You just try to kick me out. The smirk vanished from Ethan's face. Nearby, the Armani-suited executive nearly choked on his wine. The woman in the black dress covered her mouth, eyes wide. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's confidence collapsed in real time. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, as if his brain was scrambling for an escape route that didn't exist. He stammered, glancing wildly at the maitre d' for help. The maitre d' looked just as stunned, his previously smug expression now frozen in horror. Trump didn't move. He didn't need to. The weight of his words was enough. Ethan swallowed hard. His arrogant demeanor was gone, replaced by the unmistakable panic of someone who had just made the worst mistake of his career. I didn't realize, sir, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump exhaled, shaking his head slightly. No, you didn't. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody spoke. Then, finally, Trump leaned back, his expression unreadable. You know what's funny? He mused. I built this place to be about excellence. The best service. The best experience. But I guess somewhere along the way, we started hiring people who care more about appearances than actual service. Ethan swallowed again, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. You see, Trump continued, his tone now measured, a restaurant like this? It doesn't run on chandeliers and velvet tablecloths. It runs on respect. Respect for every single person who walks through that door, regardless of what they're wearing. Ethan nodded frantically. I understand, sir. I really do. It won't happen again. Trump studied him for a moment, as if deciding his fate. Then, slowly, he pushed back his chair and stood. The room remained completely silent. He adjusted his suit jacket, glanced around at the still stunned onlookers, then turned back to Ethan. You're right about one thing, he said. This place does have standards. And right now, you don't meet them. And with that, he walked away. Ethan, paralyzed with shock, could only watch as the most powerful man in the room, who he had just tried to throw out, left him standing in the wreckage of his own mistake. And this lesson? It was one he would never forget. The restaurant was silent. Not the comfortable silence of fine dining, where only the soft clinking of glasses and murmured conversations filled the air. This was something different. It was the stunned, heavy stillness of a moment where reality had just shifted. Ethan, the once smug waiter, stood frozen. His face was a battlefield of emotions: shock, confusion, and creeping terror. You own this place? He finally choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cuffs as if he had all the time in the world. He let the question hang in the air for a moment, watching the waiter squirm. That's right, he said simply, his voice smooth and unwavering. Le Magnifique. My restaurant. My rules. Ethan visibly swallowed. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. The surrounding guests, once entertained by the humiliation of an underdressed intruder, now sat stiffly in their seats, their curiosity turning into discomfort. A man in an expensive suit cleared his throat. A woman in a sequined black dress nervously adjusted the napkin on her lap. The maitre d', who had been watching from a distance, rushed forward, his face ghostly pale. Mr. Trump, he blurted, his voice shaking slightly. I had no idea you were dining with us this evening. Trump exhaled sharply, a half laugh, half sigh. No kidding. The maitre d' turned to Ethan so fast it was a wonder his neck didn't snap. You idiot, he hissed through clenched teeth. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ethan opened his mouth, but Trump raised a hand, stopping him cold. Actually, Trump said, his voice casual but laced with something undeniably dangerous. I'd love to hear from Ethan himself. I mean, He was so sure a minute ago. Let's hear it, kid. What exactly made you think I didn't belong in my own restaurant? Ethan stammered, his face now a deep shade of red. I didn't recognize you, sir. You weren't dressed like our usual clientele. Trump let out a short chuckle. Oh, is that so? And tell me, what does a usual clientele look like? Because I built this place to serve the best, not just the best dressed. The waiter's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Trump sighed, shaking his head. You see, that's the problem with people like you. People like me? Ethan echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, Trump said, his tone sharpening. People who judge success by appearances instead of substance. You thought I didn't belong here because I wasn't wearing a tux? Because my hair wasn't perfect? You didn't even think to ask my name before you tried to kick me out, did you? Ethan stood there, paralyzed. Trump leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes locking onto the young man with an intensity that could crush lesser men. You know, Trump continued, I didn't always wear $1,000 suits. I didn't always own places like this. But let me tell you something. You don't get to decide who deserves respect. That's where you messed up, kid. The restaurant remained deathly silent. Every person in the room knew they were witnessing something huge. The maitre d' stepped in again, his voice desperate. Mr. Trump, please allow me to personally apologize. This was a terrible misunderstanding. Trump waved him off. I don't need an apology from you. He is the one who made the mistake. He pointed directly at Ethan. So, let's hear it. Do you understand what you did wrong? Ethan, now visibly sweating, nodded rapidly. Yes, sir. I was wrong. I judged you without knowing who you were. I should have treated you with respect, no matter what you were wearing. Trump studied him for a moment, then exhaled, as if debating something internally. Then, he nodded once. Good, he said. You're fired. The words hit like a gunshot. The maitre d' flinched. Ethan's entire body stiffened. Please, sir. Ethan stammered. I really didn't mean any harm. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake. Trump didn't blink. You're right. It was stupid. And in my business, stupid gets people removed. Ethan's breathing quickened. Sir, please, I need this job. I was just trying to follow the rules. Trump's expression remained unreadable. No, you weren't. You weren't following the rules. You were following your own bias. Big difference. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the maitre d' cut him off. Ethan, go. His voice was cold, firm, final. The young waiter looked around, his eyes darting toward the wealthy patrons, none of whom were coming to his defense. He was alone. Slowly, he stepped back. His face was a portrait of humiliation, regret, and utter defeat. As he turned and walked away, the silence in the restaurant remained heavy. Trump took a deep breath and looked around. You know what's funny? He said aloud, addressing the room now. Most of you were enjoying the show when you thought I was just some nobody getting kicked out. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Trump shook his head. I built this place for excellence, not arrogance, and certainly not snobbery. He turned to the maitre d'. I want every single person on my staff to understand this. You treat every customer with respect. I don't care if they're wearing a tux or a t-shirt. If they have the money to eat here, they belong here. Period. Got it? The maitre d' nodded quickly. Yes, Mr. Trump. Absolutely. Good, Trump said. Then, with a final glance at the now shell-shocked restaurant, he picked up his menu, smirked, and said, Now, let's see what's good to eat. The aftermath. Ethan never worked in the fine dining industry again. Word spread fast in New York, and no high-end restaurant wanted to hire the guy who had publicly insulted Donald Trump in his own establishment. But he did learn something. Years later, working as a mid-level manager in a completely different field, he would always remember that night. He would never make the mistake of judging someone by their appearance again. And every time he passed Le Magnifique, he felt the sting of regret. A reminder that in the world of business, respect and perception could make or break you. And that night, it had broken him. The tension inside Le Magnifique was thicker than the finest steak in the house. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the chandeliers above, casting golden light over a room frozen in disbelief. Donald Trump had just turned the entire restaurant upside down. Ethan was gone, humiliated, his career in fine dining obliterated in the span of a few minutes. The banker, who thought his tailored suit and arrogance made him superior, had been put in his place. And now, Trump was walking away, victorious, with nothing but a wrinkled suit and absolute authority. But before he could even reach his table, a voice broke the silence. "Mr. Trump, wait." It was the maitre d'. His usually confident, polished demeanor was gone. Instead, he looked nervous. Trump stopped, slowly turning back. He had expected this. The maitre d' took a step forward, hesitating, as if choosing his next words carefully. "If I may ask." His voice was quieter now, more respectful. "Did you plan this?" A small smirk crossed Trump's face. Bingo. The entire room stiffened. Eyes darted between Trump and the maitre d'. Even the guests who had tried to blend into their chairs now leaned forward, desperate to hear the answer. "Plan it?" Trump repeated, tapping his chin as if pretending to think. "Let's just say, I had a pretty good idea of what would happen when I walked in here dressed like this." The maitre d' swallowed hard. "You wanted to get kicked out?" Trump's smile widened. "I wanted to see if my own staff had forgotten what this place was really about." He glanced toward the door where Ethan had exited. Turns out, some of them had. A ripple of shock spread through the restaurant. This was a test. Trump had set them up. He knew exactly how people like Ethan and the rest of the restaurant would react. Judgmental, arrogant, focused more on appearances than actual value. And they had all failed. "You see," Trump continued, his voice filling the space with undeniable power, "money and success aren't just about looking the part. Anyone can throw on a tuxedo and pretend to belong. But real power?" He let the silence hang for a second before delivering the final blow. "Real power doesn't need a dress code." The maitre d' looked like he wanted to crawl under a table. Trump turned his gaze back to the guests, his piercing blue eyes scanning their expressions. "I saw it on all your faces when I walked in. You were laughing, whispering, probably wondering who let the nobody inside." He shook his head. "And now? Now you're sitting there, realizing just how wrong you were." The banker, the one who had tried to argue, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His previous confidence had completely vanished. Trump let out a small chuckle. "It's funny, isn't it? If I had walked in here in a $10,000 suit, not a single one of you would have looked twice. But because I came in looking like an average guy, you thought I didn't belong." The room stayed silent. "That's why I did it," Trump finally said. "I needed to remind everyone, my staff, my guests, even you in the fancy suit over there, what actually matters." He paused, then gestured to the maitre d'. "And I suggest you do the same. Because the next time someone walks in here, looking like they don't fit in, they might just be your boss." The maitre d' nodded rapidly. "Of course, Mr. Trump. I'll personally make sure this never happens again." "You'd better," Trump said simply, "or you'll be joining Ethan." The weight of his words crushed the air out of the room. Trump adjusted his jacket one final time. Then, as if the entire situation had never happened, he walked to his table and sat down. Within seconds, a flurry of movement erupted around the restaurant. The maitre d' was barking orders at the staff, who scrambled to make sure Trump's meal was delivered with flawless execution. The whispers started again, but this time, they weren't mocking. They were in awe. Trump didn't need a tuxedo to command respect. He didn't need expensive cufflinks or a Rolex to own the room. He had walked in looking like a regular man and had left everyone speechless. Because true power? It speaks for itself.